All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share to thank. Excuse me. Our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Shvat. Haba'alim L'Torah, Mrs. Selma Wolf, for dedicating all of Shuman Joshos this month with gratitude for the refuahs from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the merit of a refuah for all of those in need, in the schus of our brave soldiers, and in the schus of the return of our hostages. That we dedicate as a shir entire Maseches Bava Kamma Le'ili Nishmas Master Sergeant Elio Michal Harush Hashem Yikom Damo. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu provide an aliyah for his neshama and a nechama for his family. Also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Pei Gimel 83, and we are picking up on 82b, Pei Beis Amud Beis, 18 lines up from the bottom. If my memory serves me correctly, we finished with Egla Arufa yesterday. Is that correct? Egla Arufa? Yeah? Okay, good. So I just remember we're going through the list of things, list of halachas that essentially don't apply to Yerushalayim. So just understand there's a common denominator. What's the common denominator? Common denominator is that these are all things that refer to land that is called an inheritance. All right, or l'rishta, something called an inheritance. But since Yerushalayim was lo nischalka l'shvatim, right? Yerushalayim belongs to everyone. Therefore, because of technicalities, it is excluded from certain halachas. So the last one we did was Egla Rufa. The Gemara then goes on and says, Ve'ena metami ben negoim. Ultimately, Ir Nidachas, Yerushalayim cannot become an Ir Nidachas. Remember again, Ir Nidachas is a city where all of the inhabitants have worshipped Avodah Zarah. The halacha with such a city is it's totally destroyed. Everything is destroyed. All of the property is burned. Right, the entire city just destroyed to the ground. So the Gemara says Yerushalayim can't become an Ir Nidachas. Why? Dichsiv Arecha, because when referring to an Ir Nidachas, the Torah speaks about one of your cities. Once again, one of your cities refers or references the concept of possession. Yerushalayim is not divided up amongst the tribes. Next, Yerushalayim itself, right, the homes in Yerushalayim cannot become tameh with tzaras. Dichsiv v'nasati nega tzaras bebeis eretz achuzaschem. So as HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will bring tzaras in the homes of the lands in which you retain, right? The lands in which you inherit, the lands that are yours. And once again, the Yerushalayim lo nischalka l'shvatim. Yerushalayim was not divided amongst the tribes. Ve'motziin ba'agizin v'gisturos. So we're saying Yerushalayim, you can't build structures that have protrusions or protruding balconies. What's the logic? So there's two purposes. We'll say the first is a tumah issue. What we're concerned about is the proliferation of tumah, because remember again, if you have a beam that extends and it has certain dimensions, or you have a balcony that extends and it has certain dimensions, and then let's say again something tameh is underneath it and someone else passes underneath that protrusion, suddenly that individual is going to become tameh alt tumas ohel. Furthermore, again, protrusions could also potentially cause a problem. Protrusions could cause a problem, ultimately, of damaging. So therefore, again, in order to avoid proliferation of tumah, in order to avoid any type of damages, so halacha l'maisa, you can't have these things in Yerushalayim. Vein osin ba'ashbasos, we don't make garbage dumps in Yerushalayim. So we'll say mishum shkatzim, because garbage dumps attract all types of rodents, and shkatzim, and everything else. And we don't want that in Yerushalayim. Vein osin ba'kivshonos, we don't make furnaces. Mishum kutra, because furnaces create smoke, right? And therefore, again, that's a lack of dignity for Yerushalayim. Veinosin ba'ganos upardesin, we don't create gardens or orchards. Mishum sircha. So Rashi says over here, sircha means asavim ra'im hagidelim sham v'zarkim b'chutz. So we'll say, so some say that sircha means because whenever you have a garden, you have orchards, you have weeds. And what do you do with weeds? You pluck them out, and you throw them, you discard them. So it doesn't look nice for Yerushalayim to have piles of discarded weed. But then Rashi also points out, Va'od derech ganos lezablon v'yesh sirchon. Other possibility we'll say is, in order to maintain a garden or an orchard, you need to fertilize it. When you fertilize it, there's a bad odor, and we don't want that odor in Yerushalayim. Okay, vein megadlin batanagolin, and also we saw this already before. We don't raise chickens in Yerushalayim. Mishum Kodshim. Remember again, because chickens are like scavengers, and we're concerned that they're going to bring some type of tumah and come in contact with the consecrated items, of which there is much in Yerushalayim. Okay? So the Gemara says, we do not leave the dead unburied in Yerushalayim overnight. The Gemara says, Gemara. That's a tradition. That's the tradition. Now, what's interesting to note is that whereas the other items in the list really were enactments in order to really safeguard the physical or spiritual beauty of Eretz Yisrael, or were due to a technical issue that Yerushalayim was not divided amongst the tribes, this last idea of not leaving the dead buried overnight ultimately is a Gemara. It's a tradition. So we'll say that's the end of that sugya. Next, back to the Gemara, back to the Mishnah. In Megadlin Chazirim b'chol makom. So remember again, the Mishnah said that a Jew is not allowed to raise pigs. Can't raise pigs. Now that's true in Eretz Yisrael, and it's true outside of Eretz Yisrael. Now why is that? Why is that? Because we'll say, I'll point out to you, it's not like there's a blanket prohibition against raising non-kosher animals. Right? In other words, if it would just be a Jew can't raise non-kosher animals, okay, but like, I don't know, I could raise horses, right, if I want to. I could raise camels if I want to. It seems to be dafka prohibition against chazerim. So what's the pshat? So says the Gemara, Tan Rabban, I will say, this is an incredible story. First of the wide lines on the bottom. Tan Rabbanan, Kishetzaru beis chashmonai zalza. So we'll say a little bit of history. We know the Chanukah story, right? At the end of the Chanukah story, the Chashmonaim went ahead and defeated the Syrian Greeks. Now remember, the Chashmonaim were a family of Kohanim. They did something very interesting after the defeat of the Syrian Greeks, which is they assumed the monarchy as well. Now, normally, remember again in Yiddishkeit, so monarchy comes from Yehuda, and religious leadership comes from Shevet Levi. So now you have the Chashmonaim taking everything. So there's an interesting machlokes between the Ramban and the Rambam as to whether or not that was a good thing. Whether it was initially a good thing, not a good thing, one thing becomes clear, which is the Hasmonean monarchy becomes corrupt as time goes on. This is the story already towards the end, so to speak, of the Hashmonai monarchy, when there was a profound split in the monarchy itself. Rival factions within the same family. So watch this. So essentially, there were two. We're going to see two Hashmonai brothers, and they were both jockeying for power for the monarchy, and one laid siege to the other. Now, what happened? Horkinus mi bifnim, so the brother Horkinus was inside. Va'aristublos mi bachutz, and Aristobulus, well, he was outside. So both say, so just to understand how tragic this is. Brother laying siege against brother. Right? So brother Horkinus on the inside of Yerushalayim and Aristobulus on the outside of Yerushalayim. Ubechol yom hayu mishal shalem b'hem bekupa dinar v'hayu malin b'hem timidim. So we'll say, so now remember the Beis Hamikdash is standing, right? The Beis Hamikdash is standing. So what's the problem? The problem is that the people on the inside need to be able to go ahead and offer up the carbon tamid every single day. So what would they do? Something very interesting. So they would lower down in a bucket money, right? So the Horkinus camp would lower down in a bucket money. The Aristobulus camp would go ahead and put in some animals for the carbon tamid, and then they would raise it back up. So I will say it's incredible because as much as there was a political battle, more than just a political battle, a physical battle between brothers, everyone had a vested interest in the continuity of Beis Hamikdash service. It's incredible. So what happened? So the Gemara says, "V'hayusham zakin echad." There was a certain older man there, she'emake b'chachma yevanis, who was well versed in Greek wisdom. Rabbi say, so we're going to see V'amar lahem. Rabbi say, now this ability, this Greek wisdom, allowed him to communicate in a way that no one else was really able to pick up on. So he said to Aristobulus, Amar lahem, Kozman sha'oskim ba'avoda ein nimtzar biyadchem. So he said to Aristobulus, he said to them, listen, as long as Hyrcanus and his followers are inside of Yerushalayim and they are continuing the service in the Beis Hamikdash, you will never be able to overtake them. So what happened? Lamachar, so sure enough, the next day, shil shilu dinar bekupa. So remember again, the Hyrcanus camp lowers money in the bucket, and what happens? V'halu lahem chazer. And on both sides, the Aristobulus camp, instead of going ahead and giving them a sheep or a lamb, something else for carbon tamid, goes in and puts a chazer in the bucket. Kevin Shegi Lachatzi Achoma, when they were raising up the chazer, now obviously the Hyrcanus camp didn't realize the animal that was in the bucket, so they're raising up the bucket. When the bucket got halfway up the wall of Yerushalayim, Na'atz Siparnav Bechoma, so the chazer dug its hooves into the wall. Even the chazer recognized that it can't go into Yerushalayim. And literally again the land shook. The land itself shook. I will say, there's so many tragic components to this story, right? The tragedy of brother against brother, which has always been the undoing of Klal Yisrael. The undoing of our people has never been external enemies. It has always been internal enemies. The idea ultimately, again, of brother turning against brother, and I will say the idea over here of brother turning against brother only leads to one thing. When brother turns against brother, then we turn against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the way that it works. If we cannot love each other and we cannot get along with each other and cannot work with each other, it is only a matter of time until we turn our backs on the Ribono Shel Olam. And sure enough, again, one brother, just in order to gain against the other, is willing to send up a chazer into Yerushalayim. So literally the land shook over this. Ba'osa Sha'amru, at that moment, Chazal decreed and they said, Arur ha'ish she'igadol chazerim. Cursed is the person who goes ahead and raises pigs. Va'arur ha'ish she'ilamid espino chachmas yevanis. And cursed is the person who teaches his son Greek wisdom. Because we'll say it was this Greek wisdom that gave this elder, this zakin, the secretive ability or the ability to surreptitiously communicate and give this piece of terrible advice. And about that time it was said that the carbon omer, which is the barley offering offered up on the second day of Pesach, that came from Ganos Srifin, which is a place that is very far away from Yerushalayim, and the shtei lechem, the 2 loaves that are offered up on Shavuos, that came from the valley of Ein Socher, which is also very far. Now, Rashi points out over here, take a look at Rashi, he says, V'al osa shashaninu, b'menachas, she'maise she'baha omer she'erag yelav min ha'karov Yerushalayim, Osa Shabba Miginas Srifin, Rachok Mirushalayim, Lefi Shechrivu B'nei Mitzras Tuas Hasada. So I will say this is just a secondary historical footnote about this entire episode. The siege was so severe, I will say, that not only was there a siege, but the besieging army, which was the army of Hyrcanus, the followers of Hyrcanus, burnt all of the fields around Yerushalayim. So that Rabbi says, so that when there was a need to bring the barley for the carbon omer, or ultimately the shtei lechem on Shavuos, normally they would be able to bring the produce from nearby to Yerushalayim. But because of all of the destruction, they had to bring the barley on Pesach and the shtei lechem on Shavuos from faraway areas. So pervasive was the destruction in the area. We'll say overwhelming. And again, it's the very same story to this very day. At the end of the day, when we go to war against each other, when we fight against each other, when we cannot figure out how to be an ish echad, belev echad, terrible things happen to our people. We destroy anything and everything around us. And it's a lesson that sounds so simple, but yet a lesson that keeps repeating itself for the last thousands of years. Dramatic Gemara. The Chachmas Yevanis Miyasira. So we'll say the Gemara says, but one second, are you not allowed to teach your son this Greek wisdom? The Gemara says, Vatanya, but we learned. Amar Rebbe said, Be'eretz Yisrael, top of Pei Gimel, Be'eretz, so 83a, Be'eretz Yisrael, Lashon Sursi Lama. So in Eretz Yisrael, why does anyone need to speak Lashon Sursi? Sursi was a language. Either, Lashon HaKodesh, Lashon Yavanis. Either speak Hebrew or speak Greek. In other words, there's no need. Rabbi was just saying, I don't understand why people take the time to learn Sursi Either speak Hebrew or speak Greek. Okay, Rabbi Yossi says, in Bavel, Lashon Arami Lamo. Why do I need Lashon Arami? O Lashon HaKodesh, O Lashon Parsi. Either speak Hebrew or speak Persian, right? So the point over here is, what is the point? The point the Gemara is making is that you see that Rebbe speaks about Greek as an alternative language, that a person is allowed to speak Greek. So how can you say that you can't teach a kid Greek wisdom? To which the Gemara says, no. Amri, Lashon Yevani L'chud, Chachmas Yevanis L'chud. It's two different things. There's Greek language and there's Greek wisdom. Two separate things. Chazal said you can't go ahead and teach your kid Greek wisdom. That apparently is this ability to communicate in a more surreptitious or coded way. That's what Chazal didn't like. Greek language was fine. Regular Greek language was fine. The Chachmas Yevanis Miasira. But is Greek wisdom problematic? Listen to this story. V'ham Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel. Mishram Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda is the name of Shmuel in the name of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Eini olala lenafshi mikol benos iri. So we'll see quotes over here the pasuk from Eicha that literally again my eyes give so much pain to my heart. Mikol benos iri, from everything that I've seen happen to the daughters of my city. So therefore, I get about to listen to this. So he said, Rabbi Yehuda said, name of Shmuel, name of Shimon Gamliel, or Shimon Gamliel said, Elif yiladim hayu bebeis abba. There were 1,000 children in my father's household. In other words, my father was responsible for the chinuch. Rabbi Gamliel was responsible for the chinuch of 1,000 children. So chamesh me'os mehem lamdu Torah. 5 of them were being educated in Torah. Chamesh me'os lamdu chachmas yevanis. And 500 of them were being educated in Greek wisdom. V'lo nishtayer mehem ela ani kan uben achi abba ba'asir. And Rabbi Shmuel said, out of those 1,000, there's 2 left. There's 2 left, me and my cousin, right? Me and the son of my father's brother in Asya. And I both say, just understand, this is during the times of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, right? So what he's talking about over here, so this could be a variety of different things. This could be the Churban, this could be Bar Kochva rebellion, this could be a number of different things. But the point that he makes here was like, can you just imagine this? I'll say, sometimes like, we forget just overwhelming pain, like these type of episodes. This is it's like a footnote in Jewish history. 1,000 children. Shmuel saying, there's 2 of us left. Me and my cousin. Incredible. So the Gemara said, so why is the Gemara bringing down this story? Why is bringing down this story? Because telling us that children were taught Chachmas Yevanis, right? In the house of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's father, Rabbi Gamliel, they were teaching them Chachmas Yevanis. What's going on over here? Amri shiny base Rabbi Gamliel show you Krovin L'Malchus. It's different. Rabbi Gamliel's family, on both sides, were very close to the monarchy, to the Caesar. So as such, again, when you're close to the monarchy, you're allowed to do certain things that perhaps the common man is not allowed to do, because that relationship requires it of you. So whereas normally, even if we take the approach that you can't learn Chachmas Yevanis, for those who are close to the monarchy, they need to be versed in Chachmas Yevanis. So it could very well be that this group that Rabbi Gamliel was educating was either a family group or was a group of nobility, children who ultimately had to grow into adults who had to be able to work with the government, and therefore had to be versed in Chachmas Yevanis. Kidisanya, like we see in another brayso, another example of this, of that sometimes when you're working with the government, certain accommodations need to be made. So the Gemara says, Hamisaper kumi. So this is interesting. Kumi was a type of haircut. That Gentile nobility often used to have. So generally, if you give yourself a kumi haircut, hareze medarchei ha'amori. Now, we'll say darchei ha'amori refers to Gentile practices that a Jew is not permitted to emulate. So what was the kumi haircut? Take a look at Rashi. Midarchei ha'amori, shemisarprim milifnim umishairin beloris ume'acharei. And lishnachrina derech romiim legaleach sar shalamala mina ozen b'tshuvas hagonim. So we'll say it was some type of haircut that apparently shaved the top of the head, left the area around the head, but the ikar of it was this beloris, was like this, what? like a ponytail, mullet, right? Like a ponytail mullet thing, right? This is the original mullet, right? That went ahead and essentially you grew it out on the back. So you shaved, it sounds like again, some combination of shaving the top of the head, leaving the sides, and growing out the mullet. So the Gemara says, so if you do that, that is emulating a Gentile practice. Yet I will say, interestingly enough, Avtumus Bar Ruvain hitrilu l'saper kumi, but Avtumus Bar Ruvain, they let him have a kumi haircut. Why? B'pneishu karov l'malchus, because Rabbi say he traveled in the circles of the Greek Roman nobility, and therefore again it was important for him to have this kind of haircut. Okay, interesting. Shalbeis Rabbi Gamliel hetiru lahem l'saper b'chachmas yivanis b'pnei shekrovim l'malchus. And similarly again in the house, in the family of Rabbi Gamliel, they allowed them to become versed in Greek wisdom. Why? Because again, they were close to the monarchy. Now I will say, I just want to point out, like, this is an interesting idea in general, that halacha l'maisa. Again, how to apply this, when to apply this, what do we do with this? You know, because again, on one hand, just because you're close to the monarchy, or why does that allow certain practices? So obviously, halacha like this, I will say, is very much circumstantially motivated, you know, based on what's happening around. Do you need Jews in government? Don't need Jews in government? You know, all these different things. But Lamaisa, the point the Gemara is making over here is, there may be an allowance for such a thing. There may be an allowance for this certain type of haircut. There may be an allowance ultimately, again, for the chachmas yivanis, but in general, chachmas yivanis is going to remain asura. Okay, whatever. Not that we contemporarily know what chachmas yivanis is. Also, right, it's not a greeting of your Greek mythology. Right? It was some type of other wisdom that was asur to the common man, but was permitted for those traveling in those particular circles. Okay, let's go weiter. So we'll say, so now we end off. Lo yigadol adam es hakelev ela imkin kasher b'shal shalos. Do not raise a dog unless it's leashed, unless it's chained. So the Gemara says, here we go. Tan Rabbanan. Lo yigadol adam es hakelev ela imkin kasher b'shal shalos. A person should not go ahead and raise a dog unless, of course, it is tied with a chain. Right? So we'll say what Chazal are teaching us over here is that even if you have the dog, you have to keep it on a leash. And again, it's not just any leash, they're saying a chain. So the words aval megadol hi hu beir hasmucha l'saper the kosher b'maktir balel. So we'll say the one dispensation for this is if you live in a border city. If you live in a border city where there is an active security issue, so what you can do is by day you have to keep it leashed, but at night you can let it roam. Now what's the logic of letting it roam? The logic is people are home, they're not out, and anyone who is out at night may be out there to do harm. So like this, if the dog is kind of patrolling, that would be okay. Tanya, Rabbi Elazar Gadol Omer, Hamagadol Klavim Kimagadol Chazirim. Wow. I'll say someone who raises dogs, and by raising dogs, it means has a dog, right? Someone who's going ahead and raising dogs in their home, that's like raising chazirim. Not my words. The Gemara says, Lamai nafkamina, what does it matter? Lamekam alei ba'arur. I will say that such a person is subject to a curse. Right? Just like Chazal said, Arur, cursed is the person. Cursed is the person. Ultimately, again, who goes ahead and raises pigs. So too, again, the Gemara says, cursed is the person who raises dogs. Right? Who maintains the dog within his home. Now again, I will say, lav dafka, it means if you keep it on a leash. Like it could very well be that what the Gemara is saying over here is, if you just raise a dog and you do not follow the very specific instructions that Chazal give you for dog ownership, then you are subject to arur. Then you are subject to the curse. But assuming that you're following the very basic guidelines, then perhaps ultimately again it would be permitted. Amr Rav Yosef Bar Yomi, Amr Rav Nachman. We'll say this is actually an incredible Gemara. So Bavel, Kirsmucha l'saper dami. So Bavel, by the way, is like a border city, which means that if you want to have a dog in Bavel, so you can, but Lamaisa, again, you have to keep it leashed by day and can leave it unleashed at night. At night, Tirgamar Narda, Dar Shavidah, Staid Mimbiri. We'll say this is an incredible Gemara. Uvenucha Yomar, Shuva Hashem Rivavos Alfei Yisrael. So we'll say, now listen to this. The pasuk says, "Uvenucha," right when the Aron would come to rest. So Yomar Shuva Hashem Rivavos Alfei Yisrael. And I will say, what do I learn from that pasuk? This is incredible. L'lamdecha she'ein shchina shora apachos mishnei alafim ushnei rivavos. So I will say, it teaches us that the Shechina only rests on a group of 22,000 or more Jews. That's the lashon ultimately again of Rivavos Alfei Yisrael. Rivavos Alfei Yisrael, 22,000 Jews. So V'nucha Yomar Shuva Hashem, return HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rivavos Alfei Yisrael. When does the Shechina rest? When there is, and I will say, now I just want to point out, the Gemara Maseches Brachos says that wherever there's a minyan, right, ultimately again the Shechina is there. Right? The Shechina is with every single one of us, but the idea over here is that when there is a large group, like 22,000 Jews, there is a special Hashra'as HaShechina, a special resting of the divine presence. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Chasar, so the Gemara says, Pachos mishnei alafim mishnei revavos chasar achos. So we'll say, but if there was anything less, so for example, chasar achos. Let's say again, there were 21,999 Jews. Right, 21,999 Jews. So, and therefore what? And v'haisa isha mu'uberes beinehem. And ultimately, again, there was a pregnant woman who was there. Right. So now the pregnant woman, she has the ability u'ru'uya lahashlim, and we'll say she has the ability to go ahead and be mashlim, because she let's say is 21,999, and then her fetus, right, her unborn child would be again number 22,000. The presence of that unborn child could complete the group to allow for an intense hashras hashchina. And then what happens? V'navach ba'kelev, the dog barks at her. V'hepila, and she miscarries. Nimsa zeg gorim l'shchina shetestalek mi Yisrael. It turns out that the dog owner, right, is the one who causes the Shechina to go ahead and depart from Klal Yisrael. Now, I will say, this is an interesting Gemara. The Gemara is not saying this happened. The Gemara is saying what? This could happen. And all because you need a dog, Klal Yisrael can't have the Shechina. So we'll say, so what is the Gemara trying to highlight in a story like this? We'll say, all kidding aside, we're going to see that the Gemara is going to highlight the potential negative impact that dog ownership could have on other people. That's really what Chazal are trying to highlight over here. You want the dog, that's fine. I want a lot of things in life. But the things that I want in life, I have to make sure they don't have a negative impact on anyone else. And if they can have a negative impact on someone else, a person really has to think about, do I need to put my own needs on the side for the greater benefit of the klal? I'm not going to paskin on this particular thing, but I will say, but that's the point. That's the point that Chazal are making over here. So I will say, a person says, but I really need the dog. Okay, if you really need it, need is a very strong word, but if you really need it, again, they will say there's a way to do it. There's a way to do it. And what's the way to do it? Leash it. I will say, let's just do one more Gemara. It's incredibly profound. The Gemara says, Hahi isisa, listen to this. The alas lemeifa bahu beis. This is such an incredible Gemara. There was a woman who went over to her friend's house to bake. Navach ba kalba. The dog began to bark at her. Now, every non-dog loving person is going to be able to relate to this story. Listen to this. Right? The dog began to bark with her. So I both say, what does every single dog owner say when their dog begins to bark? Oh, don't be afraid. Shakli nive. Its teeth has been taken out, right? Don't worry. It's like the same line for thousands of years. The indifference of dog owners, right? So we'll say, so listen to this. Oh, don't worry. Oh, it's so friendly. Oh, that just means it loves you. That just means it loves you. Oh, that's so sweet. That's so cute. Oh, it's harmless. So Amrle. So we'll say this woman says to the dog owner, Shakli tivosech. You know what? You could take your platitudes, you could take your niceties, and you know what you could do with it. V'shadja achizri. Not what you think, right? V'shadja achizri. Right? Go throw it on the thorn bushes. Kavar no vlad. She lost her pregnancy. We'll say the fright of the dog barking. The fright of the dog barking. So I will say all kidding aside, the insensitivity of the dog owner to the fact that this woman doesn't like animals. She doesn't like animals. Oh, the dog is so cute. The dog is so nice. The dog is so wonderful. The dog is so intelligent. The dog is so proper. The dog has great manners. The dog is all this. Dog doesn't, all these everything. That's fantastic. That's all great. You enjoy that for yourself. But Lamaisa, she was scared. She was scared. And because the owner did not take the proper precautions for that fear, then at the end of the day, it cost her a loss. It cost her a loss. And this is what Chazal were concerned about. That's all kidding aside. That's why, again, people who allow their dog to walk around unleashed, right? People who allow, and especially, again, when there are other people around, the height of inconsideration, the height of hubris and arrogance to think that just because you like something, everyone else likes it as well. And furthermore, it's against the halacha. It's against the halacha. Chazal said, you don't leave an animal unleashed. You don't leave an animal unleashed. You want to have an animal, that's fine. There's a protocol for it. There's a protocol, and that protocol demands that when there are other people around, you keep that animal on a short leash, recognizing that other people may not like it. Other people may be fearful, and fear, Abosai, could have a truly negative impact upon another human being. It's a din in basic kavod habrios. Again, all kidding aside, you want to have it, that's absolutely fine. But there is a very specific protocol that needs to be followed to make sure that your pet ownership does not chas v'shalom infringe on the other. Incredible. So let's go back to ein person nishbin liyonim. So we'll say last part, but much less controversial, right? About dovecotes, right? Dove traps, right? So we'll say. So remember again. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to get some hate mail from the dove lovers after this. Also, I always do get very interesting feedback after after the dog Gemaras. You'd be surprised. There are many supporters. I feel like I've given them a voice, right? They've been hiding in the shadows all of these years, afraid to voice how they really feel to the rough and tough dog owners, right? But Lamaisa, we're starting a movement over here. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, a person nishbin liyonim. So remember again, the Mishnah said that if you want to go ahead and put out traps for doves, again, logically, so the Mishnah said you have to distance it 30 ris, which means you have to distance it from a certain distance from the city, from habitation. Because what's the concern? The concern is the doves that you're catching are not wild doves, but rather, again, they belong to someone else. So because that, you have to distance your dove traps some amount of space, ultimately, again, from habitations. The Gemara says, "Umiyaz likuli hai," but the doves fly 30 ris. Vatana, we learned, you have to distance the dovecote from the city 50 amas, because it was again that way. Again, it's only your dovecote, and other doves won't roost there. So the Gemara says, "Amar Abaye," so 50 amas obviously is much less than 30 ris. Amar Abaye, meishat shaiti tuva kreisayu bechamishim amamile. So the truth is, doves have the ability to fly a much longer distance, but they eat their fill, so to speak. They fill themselves up for the journey within the first 50 amas. Umeishat shloshim ris v'sulo. But in terms of that, do they only travel 30 ris and no more? Vatanya, we learned, b'yishuv afilu mea mil lo yifros. In the habitation, Rabbi say you can't even put up dove traps. Or put down, I don't exactly know how dove traps work, but put up, put down, right, spread out. Can't spread out dove traps even for 100 mil. Rav Yosef says, B'yishuv Kramim. We're talking over here, ultimately, again, in an area where there are orchards, and therefore, again, I will say, since the dove has the ability to feed at multiple orchards, it goes orchard to orchard, and ultimately could travel a much larger space, or a much longer distance. Rabba Amar Rabba says, B'yishuv Shofchin, ultimately, we're talking about an area where there are many dovecotes. So if that's the case, then the halacha should apply just to the dovecotes themselves, not just necessarily to the traps. One possibility is that we're talking about, again, the dovecotes that belong to a non-Jew. Others say it refers to hefker. Or it's talking about its own dovecotes. Okay, so we'll say, so bottom line, the Gemara tells us that in order to spread out dove traps, one has to make sure before, that halacha lemaisa, they are distanced from the city, and by extension distanced from dove coats, in order that you not inadvertently ensnare someone else's dove. Hadrin alach miruba. We'll say mazel tov, mazel tov, mazel tov. Amud beis. We'll say brand new parak, and really interesting sugya over here. Actually, what's exciting about this sugya, and I will say we still do have like a lot of open-ended, really interesting halacha lemaisa pieces. Is there a legal holiday coming up? What's the next legal holiday? President's Day? Is that the next? Okay, I don't know. All right, so we'll have to find it, because there really are some great sugyas about Behema Daka, Takanas Ezra, and even in all seriousness, what does the Shulchan Aruch say regarding this whole dog sugya? So again, there is a lot to discuss, but Emir Hashem we'll have to find the opportunity. I'm sorry, Shavuos night, it might be good, but in Yanam Bava Kamma, not a bad idea. I like it. I like it. I want to say, so new Mishnah, Pei Gimel Amud Beis, Mazel Tov Shechiyanu V'Kimanu V'Giyanu. What a schus it is, Baruch Hashem, to begin a brand new parak. Now I will say, now what's really exciting about this new beginning is we've actually seen this sugya a number of times throughout our journeys in Bava Kamma, and now we get to actually see it inside of the Mishnah. Here we go. Hachovel b'chaveiro. If you damage your friend, what's talacha? Chayiv alav mishum chamisha dvarim. So we'll say, here it is, right? We've referenced this so many times. Now here's the opportunity to really sink our teeth into this sugya. So you damage your friend, you are chayiv in 5 different areas of damages. Right? I shouldn't say 5 areas of damages. You're chayiv, we'll call it 5 different areas of damages, or 5 different payments. What are they? Nezek, which represents damages itself, which we're going to go through each of these. Tsar, pain and suffering. Ripui, doctor bills. Sheves, lost wages. Boshes, humiliation. So now let's go through each of them. Benezek case, we'll say, what does it mean, damages? So sime es eno, kata es yado, shiber es raglo. So for example, let's say I go over to Ruvain and I blind Ruvain's eye, or I cut off his hand, or I break his foot. So what's talacha? So we'll say, how do you assess damages? Right? Nezek. How do you assess damages? Roen oso ki'ilu hu eved, nimkar b'shuk, v'shamin kamma haya yafa, v'kamma hu yafa. So we'll say it's very simple. How do we assess damages? We look at Ruvain as a slave, as an eved. An eved is being sold in the marketplace, and now we look like this. If Ruvain had his eye, whatever the damage is, his eye, his foot, his hand, whatever it is, we look at him. What value would he command in the marketplace if he was quote unquote whole, right? And now, what value could he be sold at if now without an eye? Without a leg, without a hand, and that difference, I will say, that difference in the 2 values, that's nezek, that's damages. Okay, that's number 1. Sar, how do you assess? Right, how do you pay for pain and suffering? So listen to this. Kol b'shipud o b'mesamer afilu al tziporno. So we'll say, now watch this. We say as follows. Let's say, for example, I went ahead and I burnt Ruvain. I burnt him, right? I accidentally hit him with a hot poker, or lit a fire, and it injured him. So I both say, now he's damaged. So I both say, so even let's say, by the way, it hit him. When Chazal give the example of an injury that doesn't cause depreciation, the example Chazal give is you injure someone on their nail. If you could imagine for a moment, let's say I take a hot poker, right? The hot poker, and I put it on Ruvain's fingernail. So Rabbi say, so now I've obviously caused him pain and suffering, but there's no nezek per se in that, right? Because lemaisa, remember, if we assess nezek as how much would you be sold for undamaged versus how much would you be sold for damage, there's no difference on the slave market between a slave who has a burn on his fingernail or doesn't have a burn on his fingernail. So there would be no nezek. So how would you assess tsar? So this is very interesting. Umdin Kamma adam kiyotze bazeh rotze lito lihios mitztaer kach. So I say this is a fascinating valuation. What we look at essentially is as follows. We look at how much would a person be willing to take, how much money would a person be willing to accept to undergo this level of pain. In other words, how much money would you be willing to accept to have a hot poker placed on your fingernails? Right? That sounds like a reality TV show, right? So it's interesting, right? Because, listen, now what's the logic? pain itself, pain and suffering, is such a subjective amount. So remember, we're going to talk about, if there is pain that results in depreciation, that's something else. Like you could have a situation of ongoing chronic pain that prevents you from doing other things. But we're going to see there are other kind of buckets of damages that capture that. So right now, the way that the Mishnah chooses to illustrate this is you have pain and suffering, but that pain and suffering doesn't impact anything else. So the way we assess it is how much money would someone be willing to accept in order to go ahead and undergo this particular type of pain. Okay, next. Ripui, doctor bills. So this one's pretty straightforward. Hiko, chayiv l'raposo. So I go over to Ruvain, I injure him. Ruvain has to go to the doctor. I'm obligated to pay for Ruvain. For Ruvain to go to the doctor. All the boats smachim. Now, this is interesting. Let's say I injured Ruvain. So imagine the following situation. Ruvain and I get into a fight. I take a knife and I stab him. Okay, so now obviously there's the doctor bills for the suturing, for the right. Let's say as a result of Ruvain's injury, he gets an infection. All about smacha means there's an infection. So if the infection is related ultimately again to the injury, then I, the damager, am chayiv take care of that. If the infection is unrelated to the injury, then ultimately pater. Then I'm pater. Both say, what happens if the injury heals, but then infection comes, injury heals, but again, everything is clearly still related to the initial injury, then ultimately again, chayiv l'raposo. Then I am chayiv ultimately to pay for anything. So what's interesting over here is the payment for ripui, for doctor bills, is not just about the injury itself, but it's about what? Any related things to the injury as well. Anything related to the injury, ultimately a chayiv for as well. Chaysa kol tzarcha, eino chayiv l'raposo. I will say, let's say, according to the doctor's estimation, Ruvain has a complete recovery, and then sometime later on, infection sets in. I'm not chayiv for that. Right? So again, I will say, obviously, these things would require a doctor's assessment. At what point is a person considered to be totally healed? In which case, then any subsequent infections would be considered to be unrelated to the first injury. Okay. Next, sheves. So I will say, lost wages. How do you deal with lost wages? Rowan also kiluhu shomer kishuin shekvar nasan lo demei yado ragalan. So we'll say this is fascinating, and this is not what you would think. See, I would think, what's lost wages? This is easy. What's lost wages? We look at what Ruvain does for a living, right? And Lamaisa, how much work is he now missing? And you pay him his salary. That's not the way it works, because we'll say if you were to do that, essentially you'd be double dipping a little bit. Because remember, we essentially already paid Ruvain kind of his, quote unquote, anything that he has lost as a person. Where do we pay that? That was in Nezek. Right, that was a nezek. Remember, again, I'll say, how do you pay nezek? Nezek represents really a holistic payment based on how much Ruvain was worth when he was whole versus how much Ruvain is worth now, quote unquote, that he's damaged. And the difference between that, so I've already made a payment that reflects Ruvain's personalistic diminution in value. So to now pay him for actual lost wages for the job he can't perform, that would be a shtickle double dipping. So instead, what do? We look at Ruvain as if he was a cucumber watchman. Now, we'll say, what's the beauty of being a cucumber watchman, right? But a cucumber doesn't have to be cute. It's not a din in cucumbers, right? Rather, what is it a din in? It's a din in being a field watcher. What's the great part about being a field watchman, right? You don't need a lot of skills and you don't need a lot of mobility. Really, pretty much what you are is like a human scarecrow, right? We just need you to be there. We just need you to be there. So we'll say we look at ultimately again how much money he would command as a field watchman, and that's the amount that you're obligated to pay him, right? For whatever amount of time he is unable to work. Again, look at Rashi. He says, try to look at the Gemara, Mishnah, Sheves Rono Sakilu Shomer Kishon. We look at him as if he's a cucumber watchman. Shekvar Nasan Lo Demei Yado U Demei Grado, because we've already paid him the value of his hand or the value of his foot. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says Sheves. It's the last wide line on top. Rashi says, Kol Yimei Acholi Rom Osakilu Shomer Kishon. All the days of his illness, we look at him as a cucumber watchman. V'no Sein Schiraso Shel Kol Yom V'Yom, and we pay him. we pay him. Now, obviously, one can imagine this is not a high-paying job, right? This is probably a very minimal salary, but that's what we pay him for. Shari ein roi lemalacha kveda, afilu below holy, shari nikta yadav raglav hu kvar nasal demir. So also remember again, I've already made Ruvain whole for the lost limb, right? So remember again, now obviously for lost wages, I look at in reality what he's able to do now. He could be a cucumber watcher, and I'm obligated to pay him that wage each and every day. And we'll talk about that more. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Boshes, what about humiliation? Hakolafi hamevayesh v'hamisbayish. I will say now, Boshes is very interesting. How do you assess Boshes? So now the Gemara says, the Mishnah says it really depends. Everything depends on the person who did the embarrassing and the person who was embarrassed, right? I will say, because remember again, if a person, let's say, is a person of a very high standing, so obviously again, his boshes, right, his humiliation is going to be more acute. Furthermore, again, I will say, if the person whom he was embarrassed by is a relatively, well, quote unquote, unimportant individual, boshes may look one way. If the person who did the humiliation is a more important person, it may look a different way. If the person who was embarrassed is a generally unknown individual, the boshes look. So I will say, so the idea the Gemara says is boshes is going to be very relative, and we're going to have to come up with an amount based on the embarrasser and the embarrassee. Okay, incredible. Let's look at the Gemara. Gemara says, Amai. I will say, so now remember again, how does all of this start? All of this starts with the payment of nezek. So what's nezek? I go over to Ruvain, I punch him in the eye, as a result I blind his eye. What's talacha? I have to pay him the value of his eye. How do we assess the value of his eye? If he sold as a servant, again, how much money would he command on the market fully intact versus how much money does he command on the market now that he has one less eye? So the Gemara says, Va'amai, why is that? Ayin tachas ayin amrachmana, ema ayin mamish. So the Gemara asks a classic question. Both say the Torah, when speaking about damages, says an eye for an eye, ayin tachas ayin. So why not say an eye for an eye? What literally means an eye for an eye. Ayin tachas ayin. And maybe if I chas shalom blind Ruvain's eye, what's that? What's talacha? Beis Din blinds my eye. How do we know that it means money? To which the Gemara says, lo saradai tchamina saradai tcha disanyach is what we learned in the Brayso. Yachol simias eino misamias eino. You might have thought that if you blind one person's eye, Beis Din blinds your eye. Katas yado es yado mekateas yado. If you cut off someone's hand, Beis Din cuts off your hand. Shibres raglo mishabres raglo. If you break someone's leg, someone's foot, Beis Din breaks your foot. Talmud makya odem umakya behema. So we'll say the Torah uses the same notion of makkah. If a person goes ahead and injures an adam, a person, or a person injures an behema, Makke behema, makke adam. So we'll say we go ahead and use the same lashon to teach us as follows: Ma makke behema l'tashlumin. Just like if you injure an animal, right? Ultimately, again, it's monetary compensation, right? Af makke adam l'tashlumin. So too, if you injure a person, ultimately, again, it's monetary compensation as well, and we do not visit the same harm upon you. But if you want to say, Harehu omer lo sikhu kofra lenefesh rotzeach asher hu rasha lamos. But the pasuk says, do not take an atonement payment, right? Or do not take an atonement for the person who has murdered someone. For since he has murdered, ultimately again he's put to death. Lenefesh rotzeach iyata lokeach kofer. Both say it's tafka for a murderer. A murderer cannot exempt himself from liability through a monetary payment. Aval ata lokeach kofer l'rashe varim shein chosin. But I will say, but someone who doesn't murder, but someone who just injures someone else, then what? He definitely can make up for it with a compensatory payment. That absolutely works. Okay, so the Gemara says, hey makkah. So we'll say, so which makkah? So we'll say, remember again, the original drasha was, it says makkah adam and makkah behema. So the same way that makkah behema, injuring an animal, is monetary compensation, so to makkah adam is also monetary compensation. So which makkah are we talking about? Ilema makkah behema yishal mena or makkah adam yumas. We'll say, so if we're talking about the pasuk says, if you injure an animal, you have to pay, but if you injure a person and kill him, you're put to death. Hahu b'ktalaksi. That's talking about a case where I killed someone. I didn't kill someone. Ruvain killed someone. Ela mehacha. Rather, what it means from here, makkah nefesh behema yishal mena nefesh tachas nefesh. So we'll say, so the pasuk says, ultimately, again, if you kill an animal, right, you have to pay a nefesh tachas a nefesh, right? One life for another life. Talking about the animal. V'samachlei v'ish ki yitain mum ba'amito. And the pasuk says, if a person will injure another individual, kasher asa kein ye'asa lo. That which he does is done to him. I says the Gemara, I love makahu, but it doesn't say the word makah in that pasuk. Haka kamrinan. Mahaka mura bebehima tashlumin. It says the word haka or makah in both contexts. And we say, Mahaka mura bebehima tashlumin, just like makah by behema means compensatory damages, af haka hamura ba'adam latashlumin. So too when it says haka by adam, that also means compensatory damages. I v'haksiv v'ish ki yake kol nefesh adam mos you must. But the pasuk says, if a person will go and injure another person, he's put to death. To which the Gemara says, b'mamon. That's when it's put to death. Is not talking about literal capital punishment, but rather again it's talking about monetary compensation. So the Gemara says, how do you know that? Mamon. How do you know that it's mamon? Maybe it literally means death. Lo because the pasuk says, Lo chada daha iskish lemaka behema liyishamen. I will say number one, because as we just saw before, there's exir shava of make. Just like make by behema means compensatory damages, so to make by adam means compensatory damages. Furthermore, it says afterwards, mum ba'adam kin yinatain bo. The pasuk says, just like you've visited an injury upon a person, so too the injury will be visited upon you. Shmamina mammon. And both say that teaches me that when you injure another person, compensatory damages. I says the Gemara, ma'im nafshecha lomar. What does it mean if you want to say? Why did the Gemara say that before? Su kakashilatana. My chazis tiyafis mimaka behema. Leilef mimake adam. The Gemara says, why do you learn out the halachos of injuring a person from the halachos of injuring an animal? Maybe learn it out from a person who kills another person, right? And say, just like if you kill another person, chas v'shalom, put to death. So if you injure a person, you're put to death. To which the Gemara says, Amri done in nezikin min nezikin, they done in nezikin mimisa. It's very simple, Bosai. We learn out the halachos of damages from damages. We do not learn out the halachos of damages from death. So therefore, Bosai, we'd rather compare a case where one person damages another person to a case of where an animal damages, rather than learning out from a case of where one person goes ahead and kills another person. Adrabah, I can see just the opposite. Done in adam in behema. Doesn't it make more sense to learn out halacha of a person from a person? So learn out the halachos of Ruvain injures Shimon from the halachos of Ruvain who kills Shimon, rather than learning out the halachos of Ruvain injuring Shimon from a case of animal damage. To which the Gemara says, Hainu diktani. That's why I said before, im nafshecha lomar. If you want to say, Hari omer lo sikhu kofer lenefesh rotzeach asher hu rasha lamos kimos yumas. What do we learn from that second pasuk? Lenefesh rotzeach iyata lokeach kofer. You cannot take compensatory damages to go and exempt a person who kills another person. Aval ata lokeach kofer leroshe ivarim she'enan chozim. But you can take compensatory damages for a case of damage visited one upon the other. So we'll say, so where the Gemara is holding right now in this discussion is that halacha l'maisa, there's essentially two sources to tell us that when you injure another person, you're not put to death, but rather it's compensatory damages. Either gezer shavav make, says make adam make behema, just like make behema is compensatory damages, so too make adam is compensatory damages. That's number one. And then number two, ultimately again, lo sikhu kofer, do not take monetary payment to atone for the person who murders. What do you see from here? When you take a life, so monetary payments cannot satisfy your obligation, but when you injure, monetary payment absolutely can. The Gemara says, lo sikhu kofer lenefesh rozech lemeute rashev anamuda asa. So we'll stop over here. I know it's a little bit in the middle of the drasha, but we'll pick up Emeretz Hashem with a little bit more of that drasha in just a bit, or just a bit, I say tomorrow. We'll say tremendous mazel tov on finishing the parak, mazel tov on beginning the new parak, tremendous shkoyach. All right, everyone, have a great day, everyone. Wonderful to see everyone.